Okay, so last part for the benefits and risk of vaccination. For the benefits, right, vaccination has proven to be able to eradicate certain diseases like smallpox, like polio in developed countries. In the poorer and more rural countries, there is still one strain of polio virus that is circulating. But in the whole world, right, the vaccination has eradicated, from what I read, 2 strains of the polio virus. So we are left with one in the poorer and more rural countries now, right? So I hope that one strain gets eradicated soon as well. Vaccines are effective, proven again to be able to protect us against severe diseases. There may again be small infections and small level of the disease, as what we see in COVID for vaccinated people, but by and large, right, we are protected against the more severe symptoms of the disease. The cost of vaccination is usually lower than the cost of treating a patient that is down with the disease, right? And the cost here is not just the financial cost on the patients, right? It's also the social cost, the emotional cost, and in terms of public health, the healthcare system, right, will be overwhelmed, right, if everybody is sick. So vaccination prevention, right, is always better than cure, right? So vaccination would have usually lower cost than treatment. Okay, and we have just looked at herd immunity. So vaccination would be a big contributor to achieving herd immunity to protect those that are not immune to the disease. Okay, but there are risks involved, right? So if the vaccine used is containing the live pathogen, attenuated ones, the live pathogens does infect and replicate inside our body. So when there is replication of the pathogen, there may be mutations gained, and such mutations may allow the pathogens to regain their virulence, right? Regain their ability to cause more severe diseases. Okay, and for people that are immunocompromised or immunosuppressed, right, like people with AIDS, like people who have just had, say, organ transplants, older individuals as well, right? For such people, the attenuated pathogens, even though they are weaker, may still be too pathogenic, right, and may cause diseases in them, right? So people that have suppressed immune system or weakened immune system shouldn't be given such a live attenuated vaccines. There is always a risk of allergic reactions. We have read it in the news, right, for COVID vaccines. And remember that the vaccines triggers immune responses, and for certain immune responses, if it is too strong, it may cause damages to our body, right? Like, for example, the cytotoxic T cells, the natural killer cells, right? They kill infected cells. But when they do that, there may be collateral damage to neighboring cells that are healthy, right? So when there is an overstimulation of the immune response due to the vaccine, then it may cause severe damages to many cells and therefore damaging the tissues. So when tissues are damaged, then tissue functions are lost, then that affects our health, and in extremely severe cases may cause death. Okay, and I did not include this in the risk, this part of the notes, but we have mentioned this elsewhere in the notes. Okay, so immunity that is produced due to vaccination may be decreased over time in certain people, in certain cases. Right, so not exactly a risk, but more a limitation of vaccination. Okay, so next we'll be looking at specific types of vaccines and their benefits, specific benefits, and risk as well. Right, so this part, the slides are exactly the same as the notes, so I'm not going to read. Okay, I'm not going to go through point by point. I'm just going to highlight and explain certain points more deeply. Okay, so for those that I don't mention, please just read yourself lah. Okay, so for the live attenuated virus, right? So we have already looked at how it may pose a danger to those that are immunocompromised, or it may regain the virulence, right? So this part we have looked at already. For the benefits, right? Because these pathogens are live, they do, to an extent, they are able to replicate inside our body. So the number of pathogens, these vaccine pathogens, would increase in our body for a while, at least, right? And so therefore that will trigger a stronger immune response, which is linked to a more long-lasting immunity. Okay, and because they do infect our cells, right, and they replicate inside the cells, especially if it is a virus, right, an attenuated virus, there will be the production inside the cells of these pathogenic antigens, right? So recall what you learned previously. We have looked at how infected cells are able to present pathogenic antigens synthesized inside the cells via MHC class 1 molecules, right? So that will trigger the cell-mediated immune response involving the cytotoxic T cells. So at the end of the immune response, right, not only do we have memory B cells, we also have memory cytotoxic T cells. So there are such things, yeah? So even though we don't really talk about T cells that much, there are memory T cells as well. Okay, so besides the humoral immune response, right, there can also be the cell-mediated immune response if the body is invaded by the actual pathogen. So that gives a stronger immunity to the actual pathogen. Okay, so these are benefits for live attenuated vaccines. For these three, right, the date vaccines, the date pathogens, the subunit, meaning certain parts of pathogens that contains the antigens. Toxoids is specifically for bacteria, because bacteria sometimes produces toxins which cause the disease. So these vaccines is against the toxins, right? These are inactivated toxins. We call them toxoids, yeah? So all these are not going to be able to replicate, so they are called non-infectious vaccines. They cannot replicate inside the body. So whatever amount, the dose of vaccine, that's all we have, right? So that would be quite limited. So therefore, the immune response would be smaller, which is linked to a not so long-lasting immunity, right, in certain people. Okay, but they do not cause diseases because they are really not the live pathogen, not even the entire pathogen in this case, right? So they are not gonna cause any disease, even for those that has a compromised immune system. Although if they are compromised, if they have compromised immune system, then the vaccine wouldn't really trigger an immunity lah, right? So it's like give them, it's kind of no use, but at least no harm. Okay. However, right, because there's no infection, right, so that doesn't really trigger the cell-mediated immune response. So there's only the humoral immune response that will be triggered, and the protection is only the protection against the actual pathogen, right, would only be through the humoral immune response. So if we are infected with the actual pathogen, right? There will be antibodies produced very quickly against the actual pathogen, but some of the actual pathogen may be able to infect cells. Then that will take a while for the cell-mediated immune response to be triggered for the first time. So for such vaccines, right, people with these vaccinated with such vaccines, they may still have a short time period where they may have some symptoms of the disease because the infected cells are not killed so fast, so they will be able to produce more pathogens. And we only have the antibodies to protect against or to fight against the pathogen. Okay, and because of the not so long lasting immunity, right, so there may be a need for multiple doses and boosters. Right, the last one that I have included, this is really not the last type. We have actually more types of vaccines out there, but I thought I would just include those that we can understand more easily. All right, so the last one that actually most of us have come across would be this nucleic acid vaccine. Okay, so it's either DNA or mRNA coding for the antigens of the pathogen. So the one that we had for COVID, most of us at least, would be the mRNA vaccine. Okay, so again, this is non-infectious because it's not the actual pathogen. Okay, so no problem for those that are immunodeficient. Although also again, right, no use, right? You give them also no use, but at least in theory, no harm. And the nucleic acid would enter our own cells, and our own cells would then produce the pathogenic antigen. So for the COVID vaccine, our own cells would use the mRNA to produce the spike protein on the COVID virus. So because it's antigen, is all these are pathogenic antigens produced in our own cells, right? So that will trigger the cell-mediated immune response because the antigens can be presented by MHC class 1 molecules. So this is better than the previous set of vaccines, right? We can trigger both the humoral and cell-mediated immune responses. Okay, but in terms of the amount of doses and boosters, at least for the COVID mRNA vaccines, right, that does require multiple doses and boosters. Yep, so that's an disadvantage. Yep. Okay, so that's all for the lecture.